So, as you're hopefully getting a sense of at this point, the intelligence community, of course, is going to be very important in the context of the Cold War. And I'm going to invite you to actually go to the intel.gov website and specifically look at the 18 different organizations that are connected to the intelligence community today. The page that I am linking in the content is actually one that talks about what their purpose is and how it is that they do what they do. Next week, we'll actually be talking more about how this works and how it's going to affect you in terms of thinking about what perspectives you want to take in addressing material for the class. And I wanted to start off with a very quick distinction between diplomacy and foreign policy. And when we think about foreign policy, what we're really talking about are the priorities that a particular country has in relation to dealing with foreign powers. That is not necessarily the same as diplomacy, because one of the things that we know is that while countries may have specific ideas or issues that they tout as foreign policy, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is used in actually interacting with foreign powers. And of course, that is the role of diplomacy. It's not necessarily that they are mutually exclusive. They often work together, but they don't always work together. And so I just want you to be aware of that. One of the things that I would like you to pay attention to is what kind of organization you think you could fit in, given your training and your interests. For those of you who are historians, historians are often hired. Several colleagues of mine, as a matter of fact, currently work for some of these intelligence agencies. And for those of you who are in international relations, obviously, you are prime targets for these types of organizations. So keep that in mind as you look at the website and as you look at what the purpose of these different organizations is. So this week, I am actually asking you to read the first chapter from John Lewis Gaddis, The Cold War. In the short little preface to the book, you got a sense of how Gaddis is thinking about both context and causality. And in this first chapter, he really sets the ground for what we know took place immediately after World War II. All the way through the Korean War. The Korean War, of course, was extremely important in the context of the Cold War. For those of you who have ever watched old reruns of the show MASH, you are familiar with this. But I wanted to make sure that you take some time with this particular chapter because the context that he presents is important to understand the way in which the Cold War developed. And we will continue to take a look at this next week. There are a couple of different links that I associated with this week. One of them has to do with propaganda, and propaganda, of course, is the use of mass media or mass communications to persuade groups of people to a particular viewpoint. And one of the things that I included was actually propaganda posters, which were really popular during that period. Many of those posters, of course, have become collector's items today, but they were there to develop a particular perspective on the different sides, both during the Korean War and then, of course, in the context of the Cold War. The other link that I want you to pay attention to is the one that actually connects to Gaddis's views on the reality of the Korean War and the nuclear threat that it posed. That is important. We often take it for granted that this was something that people had to deal with, but we often forget just how real it was for those at the time. And then I did include a couple of different timelines for you to be aware of that hopefully will provide some additional context. One of them is from the website from the U.S. Marines, and that's a more general timeline that also includes battles. And the other timeline is much more contextual in the way that it presents information on the Korean War. So for this week, what I want you to do is to make sure to review the different links. And then I want you to really reflect on what you think is important in regards to the argument that is being presented by Gaddis and how the Cold War ramps up after World War II. Remember that in developing your discussion posts, you should really think about evidence. So what are the pieces of evidence that are compelling to you that Gaddis presents? If you have questions, this is a great place to also place questions that you might have had in terms of the reading. And then secondly, I want you to take some time to actually view what your colleagues posts. I have always found that I learned something new from the work that students do in any of my classes, and this is no exception. And so make sure to respond to at least two of your fellow colleagues before you finish this section. And then lastly, just a quick reminder that this is a post first discussion, and that is to be fair to everyone who is posting. That means that I will only grade your first post, and that is what is going to count towards your final grade. That is to be fair to everybody who posts. Some of you are early posters who will post on the first day. Some of you will wait until the last day, and there is nothing wrong with that. But it is important that everybody does their own work. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know. I look forward to your discussions. I'll be responding to your posts as you put them up. And I look forward to seeing how it is that you feel Gaddis has developed his both historical perspective in presenting context and causality and contingency in terms of the Cold War.